Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a little step back from the hard data, and we're going to look at something incredibly human. We're unpacking a really moving 5-minute narrative script called The Stranger at the Door. It's a story geared toward a Christian audience, and it deals with some heavy stuff: sudden despair, completely unexpected interventions, and the actual day-to-day mechanics of faith. So let's deconstruct exactly how this story operates to deliver such a powerful message.
Where do you turn when the world goes entirely dark? I mean, really think about that for a second. Before we even get into the events of the script, we kind of have to understand the emotional baseline it sets up. Because look, everyone watching this has likely experienced a moment where the walls just felt like they were closing in, right? That completely universal feeling of being utterly overwhelmed? Well, that is exactly where our source material begins. It builds immediate empathy for our protagonist, Emily, by placing her at absolute rock bottom. It's a classic foundational narrative technique. To truly appreciate the light, we first have to fully understand the darkness.
The story grounds us immediately with this incredibly atmospheric setting. It was a cold, rainy evening. The script doesn't just, tell us Emily is sad. It actually mirrors her internal state with the outside environment. We learn that Emily is a young woman living completely alone, and she has just returned home after a phenomenally difficult day. The source outlines this cascading series of modern anxieties. She had just lost her job, her bills were actively piling up, and honestly, as a result, she just felt completely and utterly hopeless. She's sitting alone in a dark living room, and that physical darkness, it's a direct reflection of her internal isolation.
And that intense isolation pushes her right to her breaking point. The script notes that tears filled her eyes as she sat there in that dark room. She just whispers into the void, "God, if you are really there, please help me." This is such a raw, desperate plea. It's not some formal, perfectly structured prayer. It is a whispered cry for help from someone who has literally exhausted all of her own resources. By anchoring the emotional weight of the story on this single, incredibly vulnerable line of dialogue, the source material perfectly sets the stage for what happens next. She has asked a direct question of the universe.
And the universe's response? It's immediate. And it happens in 3 distinct steps. Step 1, a sudden knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Emily is totally surprised by this because, as the text notes, nobody usually visits her. Step 2, she slowly opens the door to find a very surprising visitor. Standing outside is an elderly man wearing a simple coat, and the text makes a point to specifically highlight that his face was calm and his eyes were full of kindness. Then we hit step 3, the invitation. He gently asks to come in for just a moment. Now, the script notes that Emily felt nervous, which, let's be real, is entirely natural, but something about this man made her feel safe, so she lets him in.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the dynamic between these two characters unfolds. The old man enters, he sits quietly, looks around the room, smiles, and just simply says, "You seem worried." And wow, that single observation just breaks the dam. Emily cannot hold her emotions back anymore. She pours her absolute heart out to this stranger. She details the exact burden she's carrying, her immediate financial struggles, her deep-seated fears about the future, and just how intensely alone she felt. And the absolute most vital detail from the source text here? The stranger listened carefully without interrupting once. He provided this totally safe, silent space for her to just unburden herself.
When she finally finishes laying out all of these fears, the stranger offers a really profound piece of wisdom. He says, "Sometimes God allows storms in our lives, not to destroy us, but to teach us to trust Him." This completely shifts the perspective on Emily's suffering. The script is introducing a really interesting theological concept here, that her cold, rainy evening, her storm, isn't a punishment. It's not a sign of abandonment. Instead, it's framed as an opportunity for growth and reliance. Emily is surprised, obviously, wondering aloud how he knew exactly what she needed to hear.
But instead of answering her directly, the stranger just smiles. The source material then notes that he opens a small Bible and reads a very specific verse: "Do not fear, for I am with you." And guys, this is the exact turning point in the script. Up until this very moment, Emily has been completely drowning in fear and isolation. But upon hearing those specific words, the text tells us they touched her heart deeply. For the very first time in weeks, Emily felt peace. The intense anxiety that had been crushing her in that dark living room finally began to lift, purely through the reassurance that she wasn't quite as alone as she thought.
Having delivered this message, the stranger's purpose seems fulfilled, right? He stands up to leave. But before he walks out that door, he leaves her with a final verbal reminder. Remember, God has not forgotten you.
It is a direct answer to her initial whispered plea of, God, if you are really there. But he doesn't just leave her with words. The script details that he hands her a physical object, a small note. This note serves as a tangible anchor for Emily, actual physical proof that this incredibly comforting interaction really did just happen.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core message of the entire text. We actually get a definition of faith pulled directly from that small note the stranger handed her. The note reads, "Faith sees the light even when the world is dark." It perfectly encapsulates Emily's journey. Think about it. She was literally sitting in the dark when she whispered her prayer. The stranger didn't magically pay her bills. He didn't instantly give her a new job right there in the living room. The darkness was still technically all around her, but he provided the light, the perspective, and the internal peace that she desperately needed to endure it. This is the big, universal lesson this source story is communicating.
But then, the script introduces a moment of profound mystery. Emily thanks the man and she walks him to the door. But when she steps outside to see him off, the street is completely empty. The source is very, very specific about this detail. There was absolutely no sign of the stranger. There weren't even footsteps in the rain. She looks around in utter amazement. Where had he gone? The text leaves this totally ambiguous, heavily implying a miraculous or even divine intervention. This wasn't just some kind neighbor checking in. The lack of footprints in the rain strongly suggests an otherworldly, comforting presence that was sent exactly when she needed it most.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because the narrative pace accelerates significantly right from here. The source traces a rapid sequence of really positive events following that mysterious encounter. That very night, Emily's entire demeanor shifted. She prayed, but this time with a truly hopeful heart. The very next morning, her phone rings. It's a job offer from a company she had applied to months ago. A few days later, even more opportunities begin to appear, and her situation slowly, steadily improves. And looking to the long term, years later, she is still holding on to that physical reminder of that night.
The script takes a moment here to draw a sharp contrast. On one hand, we have the heavy burden of that cold, rainy evening, the job loss, the mounting bills, the total despair, and on the other, the ultimate resolution. But the source text makes a crucial, explicit point here. It states that the greatest miracle was actually not the new job. The tangible earthly fix to her problems, that was secondary. The really crucial point is that the greatest miracle, according to the script, was the internal peace she had found in God. The external circumstances absolutely improved, yes, but that internal transformation from total hopelessness to genuine peace, that was the true focal point of the story.
And this internal transformation had incredible staying power. The enduring impact on Emily's life is so clear. As we saw earlier, she kept that note for years, but she doesn't just shove it in a drawer and forget about it. The text says that whenever life becomes difficult again, because, hey, the storms don't stop forever, right? She reads those words again. She never forgot that rainy evening. Deep in her heart, she firmly carries the belief that God sent someone to remind her that she was never, ever alone. That one intervention provided a permanent buffer against the intense loneliness she felt at the very beginning of the story.
Which brings us to the story's ultimate thematic summary, delivered at the very end of the source script. With God, even the darkest night can lead to a beautiful morning. It's a perfect bookend, right? Contrasting the dark, rainy evening of the opening scene with the promise of a bright, beautiful morning. The script then ends with a direct call to action to its audience. If the story touched your heart, to like, subscribe, and share God's love with others. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought based on Emily's note. In our own lives, when the circumstances around us seem entirely bleak and completely unchanging, what are the small sources of light we can choose to focus on to find our own peace? Keep seeking that light and keep learning.